great skill of a historical novelist is to make the past seem both relatable and distant, and she's really good at that, right? So these are not 21st century ciphers acting against a scenic backdrop of, ye olde days. These are people who are kind of living and breathing in the time that she's recreating on the page, and that's such a skill, and she does it so beautifully. And yes, she picks interesting things and slightly left field takes on things that we think we know, which is great. So yeah, I highly recommend that one.
That is why you are the historical fiction reviewer for the Times. Hello and welcome to this bonus episode as myself and the gang discuss their favourite books of the year so far. We've got books from the ancient world to the Second World War, historical fiction and non-fiction, spies and ballerinas, with War and Peace. Please do share this with anyone interested in historical books. Links are in the show notes. If you want to get in touch, please do, either via email, X or Instagram. But in the meantime, I'll hand you over to the gang and books of the year so far. Hello and welcome to 2024's Summer Book Reads, also known as Books of the Year So Far, and it's with the gang. And the gang is to remind new listeners, or inform new listeners, and remind old listeners that we have Roger Moorhouse, who is an acclaimed historian.
Award-winning, one could say.
He claims he's a historian.
Okay, listeners, I'm going to have my hands full today. So, yes, Roger Moorhouse, acclaimed historian. And we have Richard Foreman, novelist and publisher. And we have Antonia Senior, who is a novelist, journalist, historical fiction reviewer for The Times, and currently writing a book on the Cambridge spy ring, and also the host of the Aspects of History's very much sister podcast, Spy Masters. So that's your team today, and we're going to be talking about the books that we've enjoyed this year so far. And yes, Roger's gesticulating wildly there. He's upset that Antonia's got such a long CV there. Right. So I think we can probably start with Roger, because with all that knowledge, Roger, he's just eaten a crisp, maybe not. Richard, why don't we start with you? You're primed and ready to go. Yes.
Okay, well, let's crack off with a book that's due out this week, actually, Paris 44 by Patrick Bishop. I dare say quite a few of the listeners have heard about his books. Fighter Boys, Bomber Boys, huge bestsellers. And he's turned his attention to kind of his great love, which is the city of Paris. He was posted there as a Daily Telegraph correspondent. And he's kind of written this love letter to Paris. And although it's called Paris 44, it covers the whole of the occupation and the liberation. And as I say, it's a love letter to Paris, but he's not blindly in love with things where few of the people will feature in the book come out well. Most people, whether they be kind of communist fighters, obviously the Nazis are not terribly pleasant, and even people like de Gaulle, the heroes of the book in a sense Eisenhower, and ironically one could argue that one of the sort of great protagonists of the book is the kind of the Nazi commandant, and I may sort of upset Nazi sympathisers here by getting the pronunciation wrong, but Chortitz, I believe, Roger, you can help me out.
Choltitz.
Thank you. He's finally finished his crisps, and the book is brilliant. I mean, it's got lots. It's got Hemingway, it's got J.D. Salinger, it's got fighting, it's got the politics. The book is just superbly written, superbly paced, wonderfully structured, and obviously we have Paris featuring in the Olympics, and it will probably be on fire again in the next couple of months, I dare say. But
it'll have to be liberated again.
This is a very special book, actually. It was perhaps going to be Patrick's swan song, but he's written this book, and we damn well need him to write another.
Yeah, I've read it as well in preparation for an interview coming out soon with Patrick, and I thought it was brilliant as well. So I'm glad you picked that. And there's so much about it that it interests me with on the strategic side of things with de Gaulle and Eisenhower. De Gaulle sort of is just irritating everyone, desperate to get to Paris himself. And, I guess it's the great lie, isn't it, that de Gaulle liberated Paris.
Well, ironically, lots of Spanish communists liberated Paris.
Yeah.
And he's great on that detail. I mean, there are some sort of great fun now.
I think they were the first Allied troops into Paris were Spaniards, right?
Yeah. And he covers all of that. I mean, he's great on just Hemingway as well. I mean, this guy had a bigger ego than Trump, I suspect. He was a sort of almost a sociopath.
But it's sort of a perfect tableau for a book like that, and there's so, like you said, there's so much going on, both like on a strategic level, and then in terms of intra-allied relations, and then the sort of granular detail of the characters that are there, in the city and what's going on. So it's perfect for someone with the writing talents that Patrick obviously has, and he's a wonderful writer. So. I sadly haven't seen the book. I'll confess, but I would always recommend.
There's a fair bit of humour in it as well, which is there should be more in lots more history books. But I'm trying to remember. One of the funny comments was when Paris got liberated, and that night when all the sort of American soldiers turns up. And I think someone says this is anyone who claims they didn't sleep with anyone that night is just being an exhibitionist. So it's very good. He quotes well as well in the book.
And one other amusing, the way he writes it is wry humour, which I love. Is the idea with the Spanish communists going in the French division. There's the American armoured division behind in case there's actually anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Antonia, we haven't heard from you yet, so you must go next.
Yeah, I'm feeling intimidated by all the brilliance around this table, obviously. Oh no, I wasn't being sarcastic. Well, just looking at me like I'm being sarcastic.
My eyebrows raised as well.
My first pick is a novel. So Annie Garthwaite's The King's Mother. So Annie wrote a book a couple of years ago called Cecily that did really, really well, and it was about the set during the Wars of the Roses, about Edward of York's mother, Cecily. And this is the follow-up, and it's after Edward has come to the throne, and it's all about his mother Cecily's attempts to keep him on the throne despite his incredible ability to piss people off, sleep with the wrong people, marry the wrong woman, and generally be a bit of a reprobate. And it owes something stylistically to Hilary Mantel. It's kind of close in on Cecily's experience. She doesn't fall into the trap of over-egging female agency, which always kind of annoys me in historical fiction. So there are limits to what Cecily is able to do and what she can achieve. But she's an incredible character. She's incredibly powerful. She's incredibly ruthless. She is always attempting to arbitrate the disputes between. She has 3 sons. Obviously, those of you who know the Wars of the Roses know this story well. It's Edward and his brother George and his other brother Richard, and obviously they're all like fighting like rats in a sack. And she's there, sort of trying to balance her role as their mother with her political role as trying to keep the Yorkist claimants on the throne. And it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's very rare that I read a lot of historical fiction for work, and it's very rare that I read one and I completely lose myself in it and forget that I'm doing it for a review and actually remember that I'm a reader as well as a reviewer. And this is a really good one. So that's my first one.
That is rare. I love the Wars of the Roses. I can't get enough of it. Have you written about the Wars of the Roses yet?
No, I haven't.
You're
it's
not
very
tempted?
complicated. Probably not, because the Americans can't understand it and don't care. So that's basically part of the market kiboshed.
But couldn't you market it, with the whole Wars of the Roses being the template for, Game of Thrones?
Well, I think that's past. I mean, Dan Jones did quite a bit of that in terms of articles, and he wrote a brilliant book on the Wars of the Roses, and he did it brilliantly. But I finished it, and I was still kind of confused by it all, to be honest.
Oh, I mean, that's one of the things that's really difficult about it. And it's difficult in fiction as well. I mean, they're all called Edward and Richard, and they're all fighting, and they're coming in and out of power. And it's really, really hard to do. And to weave a path through that keeps people engaged is really difficult. And I think she does a brilliant job. There's some other great fiction about War of the Roses. I'm thinking of Toby Clements, who's also got a new one out this month, actually, which is brilliant too, which is The War of the Roses through the lens of Thomas Mallory, the author of Mort Arthur. Yeah, it was another great book. And he did a fantastic trilogy about The War of the Roses too. So I think fictionally it's brilliant because it's one of those areas where you get politics meeting families. So a lot of the plot of this book, The King's Mother, is, revolves around the fact that Edward falls in love with Elizabeth Woodville, who's a very beautiful widow, but isn't dynastically a good choice for a brand new minted king on the throne. So it's one of those sweet spots in history where you get family politics meeting, politics, which makes for great fiction because, sex and power collide, which is what we want, right? Not personally, but in our fiction.
Sarah...
We're going to have to put this out after 9 o'clock.
Yeah, we will. We're Watershed. Sarah Gristwood wrote a book about Tudors in love, but she, and courtly love, and she mentions the love match between Edward and Elizabeth Woodville. And I rather naively thought that Edward had fallen in love with Elizabeth Woodville, and Sarah looked at me inside and went, "Oh, stupid boy, no." So was it love or was it?
Well, it was certainly attraction. In the novel version, I don't think it. If you the other person who's done it as a novel, I guess, is Philippa Gregory. She did a series, and in that one, and which then went on television. I think, although I'm not sure I watched it. In that one, obviously, it's a love match, but neatly glossing over the fact that Edward is gamely shagging anything else that moves within about 6 months of the wedding. So, love to a point. I wasn't there. Let's say love. Why not?
Yeah.
Let's vote for love, guys.
That
Come
speaks
on.
to my romantic side. Roger.
I'm not sure he's got a romantic side. Should we find out?
Roger, I think you were talking about a romantic fiction novel. No, he was not.
No, that was somebody else. No, that must be somebody else. No, mine are sort of actually quite solid military history. And the first one is Saul David's Sky Warriors, which is full disclosure, obviously Saul is a mate and so on, but he writes beautifully, he picks good subjects. And this is it's another knockout book about the development of British airborne forces in World War II. And he tells that story really elegantly because it's quite easy, I suppose, to get bogged down, particularly in the sort of the mire of Market Garden and Arnhem and so on, which I think for a lot of readers, is going to be a sort of centerpiece to that. But he manages to expand his narrative out, and it's starting really from really, really quite small scale beginnings in sort of 1941. Where I think we have to bear in mind that use of aerial assault in that way was kind of quite a novel thing. The Germans had done it in 41 in Crete and so on.
And they never did it again, did they?
And they never really did it again. Exactly. That's kind of my point, that in a sense it was sort of experimental. Bear in mind that aerial warfare was relatively speaking in its infancy at this point. And in terms of the grand sweep of military developments in the 20th century, this is an idea strategically that really has its apogee, I suppose you could say, in the Vietnam War in terms of use of air power in that way, projecting your power in that way. So actually, the British, when you look at it, and he brings this out really, really strongly. The Soviets aren't doing it really to any effect at all. As you say, the Germans do it early on, they Eban Amiel, and then they do it in Crete to some effect, and then they kind of stop. So they have these Fallschirmjäger that they basically use as sort of special forces on the ground from then on. So Saul brings out that sort of development very well. How from a very low base, and the first operations that they undertake are, I mean, not even terribly successful, all the way to we know Market Garden, which is as the line goes, it was a bridge too far, but it's fantastically ambitious to what they tried to do, and then even more ambitious in spring of 45, Operation Varsity as well. So I suppose you could say that the British kind of develop aerial warfare, or use of aerial forces almost to its limits during World War II, more than any other power. So
there's a lot of trial and error though.
There's a hell of a lot of trial and error.
Particularly the gliders. They don't fly.
Yeah, but it's interesting that in a sense I think it grows out a little bit like the use of sort of SOE and sabotage and all of that. It grows out of necessity in the early days of the war. It's kind of well, what can we do? We can't necessarily confront German forces toe to toe, so we have to use sort of slightly novel methods or experimental methods or whatever it is. So I think it grows out of that same mentality. And he just describes that arc, that sort of narrative arc, really, really well. And we all know how Saul writes. He writes really well as well. So it's a thoroughly good read, and it's well worth a look.
No, Saul's slipped me £20 before this podcast.
I only got 10.
No, it's £20. That's the standard fee. But it is excellent. It's pacey. I mean, one of the reasons why the Airborne took off, so to speak, was Churchill's patronage. He liked the maverick ideas. He liked the cut of their jib, and there were quite sort of one step forward, two steps back. But he persisted with it as well, and he's great on Saul's very good on selecting just who's the interesting characters.
Yeah.
Who writes well in terms of diaries, who's basically got a bon mot, and he follows certain soldiers, etc. And it's an excellent book. It's another humdinger. I mean, he was sort of born to write these kind of World War II stories, really.
No, I agree.
As much as I wouldn't mind him going back to the Victorian period, but we need him to get paid.
Well, I'd like that. But,
Me too, but he came on to do... So listeners will be familiar with Saul's discussion on Pegasus Bridge for the anniversary of D-Day, and that episode went stratospheric. So, I hope he gets some sales out of that. There's probably a tiny percentage of my devoted and loyal listeners who do actually make that big step of buying the book. But he's going to come back on to talk about Market Garden and the experience in Arnhem. And I'm interested to know your view, Roger. Operation Market Garden to me is like complete disaster. Should never have done it. But you seem to be a little bit more, it's a risk worth taking.
I think, like all of these things, I was actually doing a podcast this morning on the Warsaw Risings, which is kind of falls into a similar category of one of those things that, with the benefit of hindsight, you would say, was it worth it? But at the time, it looked like strategically and militarily, it was the right thing to do. Market Garden was always ambitious, and they knew that, and the fact that in the end it didn't work.
And the Poles were involved.
And the Poles were involved, of
and
course.
blamed the General Sosabowski.
Sosabowski, and his parachute regiment, which they wanted to be parachuted, of course, into Warsaw, which was happening at the same time, and were most miffed, to put it lightly, that they were sent to Arnhem instead. But again, I think it falls into the same category that with hindsight you might say that you do something different. But at the time it looked like the right thing, and it was bold. And I think that stage of the war, boldness in many cases was being rewarded, because we have to, in a sense, step away from the sort of teleological view of history of seeing, we know that the war ended in May 45, and actually the Germans still had a bit of fight in them, as we saw at Ardennes and so on. But at the time, it looked like they were sort of collapsing on all fronts to some extent in the autumn of 44. So to some extent, why wouldn't you be bold in that scenario? Because it looked like it was being rewarded, but in that example, as in Warsaw, it proved to be otherwise.
Right. Well, we'll move on, and now this is, I think, my first pick, and we're going to go a long way back for this. It's a bit of back and forth. My pick is The Muse of History by Oswin Murray, and it is. I don't know if it's indulgent. It's a beautiful book. It's brilliantly. Alan Lane's the publisher, and they've done a fantastic job. And actually, I had probably the best conversation I've had of the year so far, talking to, apart from when I talked with Richard, of course,
and me,
and Antonio, and Roger. And Oswin is
bruised egos in the room.
Yes, I know. Gosh, it's very easy to make enemies in this game, I've learned. And Oswin is an 87-year-old Oxford Don who's just written a book that he describes his life's work. And he wrote books for his probably best known book he wrote before was about early Greece, about Greek colonies going out into the Mediterranean. And you may have seen these maps of the Mediterranean showing where, the Greeks stretched out to. But this book is more about how basically the conceit of the book is everything we know now and everything that historians know now and everything that all historians have done is all down to the ancient Greeks. And it's quite a claim, but it's an absolutely fantastic book written with plenty of humour in it. And he starts off with Thomas Hobbes's translation of Thucydides, which he says is the best translation of Thucydides into English, because English in that period of the 17th century was the most beautiful English that existed. Those are his words. I couldn't claim.
He was there.
Oswin will be very upset if he hears this. Full disclosure, his wife lectured me at Warwick University.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is but that's not why I picked it. It's just such a wonderful. It stretches all the way through. It's predominantly the Enlightenment, but he deals all the way through to the Cold War. Is dealt with in great detail. Interestingly, I would have thought under the Soviet regime, ancient history would have been a sort of desert. But he's that's not so at all. There are some very interesting historians working in the Soviet regime writing about history. The way they can write about current events through the past.
Through the cipher of the past.
Yes, it's very interesting.
So can he bear out this thesis that so much is owed back to ancient Greece?
Well, I'm an easy sell, so yes. But I think any historian, anyone interested in historiography or just history itself, I think would enjoy reading it. I think any undergrad would like it. It's very easy to read. I don't think it's the book you read from cover to cover, page 1 through to the end. You dip in. That's what I do. That's what I like to do, but we're all different. And I think it is. It opened my eyes to so many new things, which is unusual in a book, I'd say, nowadays. Stunned silence.
I get where you come from. I do like those books that sort of, maybe a little bit left field in terms of concept, and they just, make you think about what you think you know afresh. I think that's always a good thing. It doesn't matter if you necessarily agree 100% with it, but it certainly challenges, your perceptions of history.
I mean, is there some overreach in what he's arguing there?
No.
You sure?
I've always thought this. Sorry,
Roger, you're the most proper historian in the room. Do you feel like you're the heir of Thucydides?
Well, thanks for that for a start.
There's a lot of sarcasm.
I'm trying to answer that with a straight face. I'm also extremely, based in modern history. I kind of never strayed beyond, certainly not into the classical world. So
Roger would argue we're in the world
really
today
answer
because
that
of
one.
what the Nazis did for us.
Exactly.
So
It all goes back to Franz Ferdinand.
All the killers.
one convincing argument he makes is that, and I'd never, I didn't, I guess, appreciate this, certainly when I was studying ancient history, the Peloponnesian War between Greece and Sparta, we shouldn't look at it like two city-states fighting. We should look at it as a civil war. Mm-hmm. And that's quite interesting. I hadn't thought, it's so obvious, I suppose, but but at the same time, it wasn't obvious. It certainly wasn't obvious to me. And
also kind of an imperial war, right? Because they were both enlisting all the other kind of, smaller states that were beholden to them. I mean, Athens certainly was an imperial project.
It was, although yes, Oswin would argue that Sparta is the sort of imperial ideal that Rome inherits.
Yeah.
And because Athens can get away with
rather more brutal in its nature.
Yes. Because Athens can claim democracy.
Yeah.
Which Sparta can't.
Or doesn't want to.
No. But it's a funny story behind it. I don't know if I'm going on too much about it, but it's an interesting story behind the publication of the book because he originally agreed to write it 40 years ago. And Stuart Prophet, Alan Lane, I went along with the 40 year time period, and it's worth the wait.
Well, the original title, I think, was "It's All Greek" to me.
40 years is pretty late. I mean, even by standards of some of the historians that we know and love, that is pretty late.
Wow.
Well, when I spoke to him, I had all these plans, to deal with everything, and then it ended up just being a conversation about the ancient world and how it can work today. So, anyway, that's mine. So we'll keep on going round. Richard will be next again. Then we've had Paris 44. Antonia's picked
The King's Mother, Annie Garthwaite.
The King's Mother by Annie Garthwaite. Roger picked
Saul David, Sky Warriors.
And I've picked The Muse of History by Osman Murray. So Richard, sorry, take it away.
Well, I don't know if we can call it sexist, but let's pick one for the ladies now. I mean, it's difficult to know what the ladies are under this government. It's all about context. But I'm going to pick Adam Zamoyski's book, Isabella the Valiant. And this is a book about a Polish aristocrat whose life kind of intersects with the likes of Napoleon and Catherine the Great, married to Adam Czartoryski. So there is obviously a sort of healthy Polish bent to the book, but it's just a brilliant read. I mean, a fair number of listeners has probably read Adam Zamoyski before. He knows how to put together a sentence and outfit. I mean, this is a kind of highly stylised book. It's very colourful. It really is a sort of window into this world where, this Isabella was basically kind of, this great kind of, keeper of sort of Polish history, Polish culture, Polish tradition. And a wonderful mother, patron of the arts. I mean, she also just sort of spans this kind of great Napoleonic age as well. And just the book is, she basically travelled well. So we have an insight into, Paris at the time, London at the time. Yeah. I mean, she basically...
She preferred London to Paris,
She did. Yeah. I mean, she went through money quicker than MC Hammer and Nicolas Cage. She really did spend her way around Europe.
Did MC Hammer?
MC Hammer mainly for tax reasons, I think, but for a lot of money.
And Nicolas Cage?
Nicolas Cage also spent a lot of money.
Really?
Yes, not on designer dresses in 17th century London, one should argue, although he probably would have had a go. The book is brilliant. It's pacey, and by the end you kind of realise the kind of value of the woman and the importance to kind of she really was a kind of keeper of the flame.
Yeah,
and
I think that's probably her most significant contribution in that sense. She's almost like the mother of Poland in that regard, right? Because this is the same time that Poland disappears from the map in 1795. And then it's to a large extent, her life overlaps with the sort of travails of Poland.
It's quite sad.
She sort of switches, and it's interesting to see that switch because they switch from, for example, the court and what was fashionable in Poland at the time, and he describes that very well, was French dress, right? Because that was what was fashionable amongst the upper classes. And then there's this switch to a much more sort of nationalistic, then they used to glory in wearing Polish dress, and French dress was seen as something a bit outre. And then she morphs then into, like I said, this sort of matriarch of Poland, where she's collecting, artifacts and really sets up what must be a sort of one of the first museums in Central Europe of Polish history. And that's where, after Poland has disappeared from
It's
the
like an
map.
ark.
It is an art,
Ah.
absolutely. She's sort of collecting artifacts, from Jan Sobieski and the defence of Vienna in 1683, and Polish standards and all this, because Poland's disappeared, right? So she's sort of sending out her servants to sort of collect this stuff from wherever it is, and beyond Polish history. So she had a handkerchief autographed by Frederick the Great and all sorts of weird things like that.
Yeah.
So it is an amazing book in that sense, but it also gives you a lovely insight, which I enjoyed in it, into what aristocratic life was like.
Yeah.
Because they had a retinue of well over 100 people on their estate. It's
Well,
insane.
estates, yeah.
It's insane.
And also, it's a bit like now, where, let's face it, some of them are waiting for a relative to die.
Yeah.
They need the money. But then when they get the money, they freely spend it.
Yeah.
No, it's a good, fun book. It's written with a kind of lightness of touch, and highly recommended. A great gift as well.
She had an affair with Sobieski's son, didn't she?
She had lots of affairs.
I mean, she
Yeah, but her
she
children-
collected
he was-
notches on the bedpost. I
But
mean,
he was
yes.
king. He was king of Poland, though, in Portugal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
But I don't think... I'll be corrected, but I don't think any of her children actually were between her and her husband. Is that fair?
Who survived? Correct.
That survived. Is that right?
Yeah.
So she had a host of affairs.
Yes.
One of her lovers was guillotined by the French, so she hated the French after that point. During the Revolution.
well, she wasn't too enamoured with the French or Russians, great book people, and she was a great Anglophile, as is Adam Zamoyski, of course.
Which she travelled. She travelled to. She didn't just go to London. She went up north.
Yeah.
Went to see potteries. in
Did she even go
Staffordshire.
to Liverpool?
Oh, steady on.
She went to Newcastle. I don't know. Did she go to Liverpool as well? I can't
not
remember
sure.
it from the book.
A lot of her possessions went missing then.
The wheels off her carriage.
You can express your outrage. history@aspectsofhistory.com. Well, right. So, Antonia, your second book.
Yeah, I think following on from Richard, I'll do one for the ladies as well. Although I would hasten to add, it's men can read it too.
All that context.
So I'm going to do another novel, Elizabeth Buchan, her book Bonjour Sophie. I love Elizabeth Buchan's novels. They are easy to read, beautiful, and incredibly profound and true and real about human emotions and how we live. And I think they're wonderful. And this particular book, it's set in 1959, and there's a young girl called Sophie who's an orphan, and her parents are dead. All she knows about her father is that he was something in the resistance, and her mother and her were refugees in England, and her mother has died, and Sophie has to live with these terrible foster parents who live in a kind of vicarage which is in a state of kind of moral and moral decay, and she has to escape. And it's a simple premise. It's so beautifully done. It's about a Britain on the cusp of social change. It's about a Britain on the cusp of a gender revolution, and Sophie has to fight her way to a kind of place of freedom, which for her is represented by Paris. So the second half of the book, she moves to Paris, and things become, it's more about tracking down her family legacy. But I love it so much. It gives such an incredible sense of a place and a time and a character for whom you feel like she's a real person and you're rooting for her really strongly. So I highly recommend it. But then I recommend all of Lizzie Buchan's books. I think she's wonderful.
Well, yes, her last one, Two Women in Rome.
Yeah.
She picks really interesting subjects, because the last one was based around Red Army faction terrorist attacks in the 70s, which, that I'm always fascinated by that.
Yeah, and she, the great skill of a historical novelist is to make the past seem both relatable and distant, and she's really good at that, right? So, these are not 21st century ciphers acting against a scenic backdrop of, ye olde days. These are people who are kind of living and breathing in the time that she's recreating on the page, and that's such a skill, and she does it so beautifully. And yes, she picks interesting things and sort of slightly, left field takes on things that we think we know, which is great. So yeah, I highly recommend that one.
Well, that is why you are the historical fiction reviewer for the Times.
It's this kind of insight they pay me
It
for,
is.
Ollie.
That
Yeah, not enough.
pays
They
the
don't pay me
mortgage.
enough,
Yes.
obviously, but yeah.
I was just marvelling at that beautiful phrase where you say that the key to it is making it seem both relatable and distant at the same time. I think that's rather beautiful, actually.
What can I say? I just do beauty off the top of my head. It's true, and actually lots of people do it quite badly. So my pet peeve...
Have you got an example of an author?
Well, I mean, I read a book recently. I don't like naming names, but you did feel like so much of it was a kind of sop to modern sensibilities. So it was set in a time where everything was quite brutal, where warfare was quite brutal, where everything was quite, dark, and if you were caught stealing, your hands were cut off. If you were caught, you were flayed alive. But the characters found all of this quite uncomfortable. Yeah. Okay.
No. I think you mean Lewisham.
Yeah.
But I will give you the £20 Saul David gave me if you name that person.
No, I'm not. It's too bitchy. Because it was otherwise
You
a really
haven't
good
finished.
book.
You haven't finished.
No, but all I'm saying is that the characters in this book were uncomfortable with the levels of violence in the society with which they were living. And it felt to me that was a sop to modern day sensibilities, because we would be uncomfortable with it. But I'm really, people weren't uncomfortable. It's like writing a book set in ancient Greek and having people in ancient Greece in the Peloponnesian Wars and having people wanging on about the evils of slavery. It just was not a thing. Slavery just exists in that society as a kind of natural function of the cosmos, and to kind of write fiction within those time frames and within those frameworks that doesn't take account of the fact that people have different sensibilities towards things that we think of as obvious. It bothers me.
I
But
agree.
Lizzie Buchan doesn't do that.
in history writing as well, in sort of non-fiction, where you have this, the view of the past very consciously through the prism of the present. Always annoys me.
It's unbearable because it completely distorts everything you're reading.
To some extent, we all do that. I mean, I get that thing, but it can be done. Or I think the key thing as a historian is to try and set that aside, and the task is to tell the story as it was as best as possible, and you put aside your sort of modern prejudices and so on. But all too often, especially nowadays, where history is just almost seen as a sort of didactic tool for the present and nothing more. That increasingly seems to be obvious, and it always annoys me.
I think that's completely right, because it's one thing accepting that to a certain extent we cannot get rid of our assumptions that we inherit as through living in the present. That's one thing, but to revel in those assumptions and use them to judge the past.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
exactly
I find that
right.
problematic.
And it often makes these books duller.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, it does.
even history books were looking for some escapism. And if you do it well, as you say, you can bridge this gap between sort of being interested in what's, in a sense, resonant and what's also alien.
Yeah.
And actually, listen, we do it very well, and traditionally we have, but I would say there is this trend creeping in.
Yeah.
Where perhaps editors are worried about sales and the idea of being sort of relatable to younger people. Perhaps the books become a bit of activism, really, where we see this in journalism and lots of, in a sense, cultural aspects where it's they're forcing it too hard.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think as people who operate and write within both history and historical fiction, I think we need to be braver in just saying these things are interesting just because they are fucking interesting. Sorry for swearing. And not because they somehow relate to some thing that we care about now.
We
No,
care about it, absolutely right.
I mean, because we didn't come into this because we were activists. We came into it because we love stories in the past.
Yeah.
Of the past and about the past, not about
I
us.
don't want to change the world. I want to retreat from it.
Right. Also, so narcissistical. It's such an exercise in narcissism.
Yeah.
Like, we are the only generation through which anything can be viewed.
We've peaked.
We've peaked.
Yeah.
It's
We
absolute
won
bullshit.
it, humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Okay.
exactly, and and without any of the hubris which comes with knowing that 20 years down the
Everyone
line,
thought
40,
that, yeah.
and we're going to be just as sneered at as we're,
Exactly.
I
Exactly
mean,
right.
I'm not obviously, but you guys might be sneered at in the future, but terrible.
I sneer at myself every day.
But there's a great trend. You've talked about actually a very good book on the Wars of the Roses in the medieval period. So I don't want to, I don't mean I'm not lumping in Andy Garthwaite at all. But there are lots of books written about the ancient world, particularly based around Homer and female characters in that. There's a perception that the female characters aren't strong in Homer, and that's just couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, there's been a tidal wave of books in recent years of reclaiming female stories from the ancients, almost exactly as if they hadn't been the subject of plays by Euripides, of poems by Ovid. I mean, my God, like the women were central to the stories the ancients told about themselves. I don't really see why we need to rescue those women from the silence of history when they weren't silent in the first place.
Yeah.
And secondly,
But as we said, it's about us. It's not about them.
yeah, but then there's a secondary element to it, which is that there's a kind of conceit at the heart of the project, which I find quite irritating, which is both a kind of lament that these women had no agency, and then a kind of insistence on writing them as if they have loads of agency, and you can't. And it's like, well, which?
Can't have both.
Yeah, which is it? Either and I mean, maybe the word agency should just be expunged from the English language until the end of time, but. Yeah, I completely agree, Ollie. I think it's sort of annoying and slightly ahistorical, and often I think if you want to read a book about women in ancient history, just go and read Euripides.
But if you do want to write about, I don't know, Helen, then there is a novel to be written about Helen, isn't there?
There have been plenty of novels written about Helen. But I mean,
enough. We've had
look, I will read almost anything on the ancient world. I just find the sort of relentless kind of agenda-driven novels about women in the ancient world, I'm just a bit bored of. And, and also, it's slightly stupid. So, I mean, I love Pat Barker, right? I mean, I adore Pat Barker. Pat Barker's one of the best writers in English. And her...
Regeneration.
Yeah, her Regeneration trilogy is one of the best things I've ever read. And her book about Troy was also very good. But the kind of way it's marketed and the way it's sold and the way it's presented as this sort of groundbreaking thing of putting the women at the centre stage was like, it was fine, but it's also slightly nonsensical because, the women are important, but so are the men. It's a story about humanity, right? It's a story about humans. It's a story that's resonated for, 3,000, 4,000 years or whatever it is. 3,000 years. I can't do maths. I can do words, no maths.
I can count how many bottles you've had.
3,000,
Trojan War,
4,000.
you can get away with mixing it between 3 and 4, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I just, let's maybe if we could just now draw a line, publishers, under reclaiming women's stories from the ancient world, and just bring it back to just stories about the ancient world.
I fear that request is going to fall on stony ground, but I agree.
Yeah. Well, what can we do?
I think you underestimate the impact of this podcast.
Actually, to be fair, I think they are slightly ebbing. I think they're sort of, how publishers work. Things go in massive waves, and I think maybe we're reaching the end. I don't know what's next. Reclaiming women's stories.
We'll see.
I don't know, where haven't we is there a woman in history whose story has yet to be reclaimed? I don't know.
Yeah, well, if there isn't, they'll find her soon.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on from that nice little
Rant, sorry.
interlude.
That was a rant, actually.
I know, I'm
That
so
was a
sorry.
rant.
No, this is the place to do rants. And I think it's my turn, isn't it?
I think it's me, actually.
Oh, is it?
You know,
Right.
but I don't mind.
No,
You
Roger,
can go.
please.
You know, I mean, if we're going to preserve the same order.
No, I got, yes, exactly. You should preserve
Ordnung muss sein,
Let's-
as the Germans would tell you.
Sorry, say that again, sorry?
Ordnung muss sein. So, you know, everything has to be in its place.
I like that.
On which note,
Radiohead song,
my second book is Jonathan Dimbleby's Endgame 44. Again, sticking to my trump card, or trump suit, which is World War II. He actually does. He writes very, very well, Jonathan, as you'd expect from someone with a sort of journalistic background. He's done a really good effort of research. Now, he might have researchers doing stuff for him. We've all been there. We've all done that. The end result is really, really strong. Now, he tells the story from Operation Bagration in the middle of 1944, the collapse of Army Group Centre, through to the end of the war. So the sort of final phase of the war on the Eastern Front. And really, I have to say, tells it really, really well. Very pacey, it covers all the bases in, geographically and in terms of the protagonists. And he's found some really, really new voices, actually, which I certainly hadn't heard before as sources, which really bring the whole thing to life. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's a genuine contribution in terms of our sort of understanding of that period, of that collapse. It's a relatively well trodden area, but by finding those voices, I think he really just brings something to the party. So that should be applauded. Not least, and as well, his stylistic ability should be applauded.
I was talking to a historian though, where they'd read the book, maybe an early copy, and I think in the introduction, he kind of makes the argument, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've not read it, where he's basically saying, it was, a lot of people got kind of World War II wrong. It was like the Russians that won the war. That's not revelatory.
No, absolutely not. I think there's still pockets of holdouts of the opinion that that we won the war in effect.
But they didn't win the war.
Well, they largely broke the German army.
Well, look,
it was the Allies with the Lend-Lease.
Oh, of course, yeah. But look, 4 out of 5 German soldiers died on the Eastern Front. So yeah, they might be travelling in American trucks, but they're killed by Soviet soldiers. So I think that is not, as you say, that really shouldn't be revelatory. Germany has its guts torn out on the Eastern Front.
That was kind of revisionist maybe 30 years ago.
Exactly.
It's probably orthodoxy now.
It isn't
now.
No, there's no. Look, I don't think there's anything in that sense in terms of grand strategy or historiography that's necessarily new. But he does bring new voices to the party. New sort of anecdotes and that sort of element, which I think is helpful. It's useful to, for us as readers. It keeps the reader turning the page. It keeps it human, which is, I think, is always a problem with military history. Is you can get lost in the weeds of the grand strategy and of the how many tanks were here and how who was doing what where. But actually, to bring it down into the foxhole and to tell it from a human perspective, or from the civilian stuck in the middle of it, it is always a sort of helpful reminder of that human aspect, and he does that very, very well.
Also, surely it doesn't. History books don't always have to be completely new and novel, and in fact, searching for novel angles is sometimes one of the downfalls of history, isn't it? Because you end up with people just sort of trying to be controversial for the sake of it, rather than writing a book.
It becomes conceited and it's overreach.
Yeah. And sometimes these stories just
and
need
they
to be told again.
Claims that can't be sustained.
Right, and sometimes these stories just need to be told again for a new generation, over
absolutely.
and over again, because they're important and they're good and they're interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I think if Oswin Murray were listening to this, he'd be chuckling to himself, going, "Yes, it's all been done before." The Eastern Front, though, it always is there nothing the Germans could have done then? Because I always like what ifs. If they had actually, they lose Stalingrad by the winter of 43, and so could they have said, right, okay, we'll put
43,
so we'll put up a defensive perimeter.
Yeah,
over
they try. I
1,000
mean,
miles.
through in this period we're talking about. So the German strategic method in this phase of the war is to set up what they called Festungen, or fortresses, where they hoped that, if you could hold an individual fortress, whether that be, Warsaw or Breslau or Frankfurt on the Oder, then if you could hold that, if you could pack that with troops and hold it, then it would hold up the sort of general advance westward of the Red Army, which was kind of inexorable. And there's just maths involved in terms of manpower, in terms of tanks, in terms of aircraft, everything, right? The Germans are up against it, but they imagined that if you could hold those nodal points, then that would slow down the advance as a whole. And again, and then you've got this curious mentality that kicks in, where there's this idea that the Grand Alliance has so many internal tensions and internal frictions within it that it's bound to collapse at some point. And they imagine that the sort of question of Katyn and of Poland, for example, it might be the wedge that splits the Grand Alliance, which, to be fair, was not an unrealistic assumption. I mean, it's quite remarkable in a way that the Grand Alliance lasted as well as it did until the end of the war, because there were so many frictions within it. So that wasn't an unfair assumption. So I think, in a sense, their strategy was one of holding these Festungen, these fortresses, in the hope that fate would intervene, much like it did with Frederick the Great and the so-called miracle of Brandenburg. And in the meantime, the Grand Alliance would collapse. That was, I think, was their assumption. But they're clutching at straws to a large extent because of that material superiority that the Soviets had.
It's kind of a medieval and Napoleonic idea where you hold these nodal points and you hold up everything. I mean, don't forget, there wasn't any train lines back then and other roads, in a sense, to bypass and have more manoeuvre. But that's was the thinking years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Castles.
Yeah, and just to stray horribly off subject, but that's exactly the logic behind the bombing of Dresden, of course, in February of 1945. Is that was the nodal supply point for the Festung of Breslau, which was the great fortress to the east of Dresden. So if you bomb Dresden, you're affecting that defence of Breslau. That was the strategic logic of bombing Dresden, which we reference what we said earlier on about seeing the past resolutely through the prism of the present. That's what we collectively forget, was that actually the bombing of Dresden had a real strategic rationale behind it. It wasn't just sort of wanton bloodletting. It actually had a strategic reason. But yeah, to go back to the book, he brings all of that out really well. Lots of new voices. It's a very, very good read.
Good stuff. Right. Okay. So we'll move on from the Second World War, and now this is a book I've picked. Is actually a really easy read. It's, I think, 200 pages or something. It's a pocket, and
I like those books.
It will, Roger, I will try.
Why don't you write them then?
I will send you a copy, and it fits in the pocket. It's a history of Iran, a political history of Iran since 1900, and it takes you all the way up until the recent demonstrations over Mahsa Amini's the murder of her, the woman who didn't wear a hijab, and then the morality police killed her, murdered her. So this is a book written by Ali Ansari, who's the director of the I'm probably going to get this wrong, the Centre of Iranian Studies up at St Andrews University. He's the sort of foremost, he is the foremost historian on Iran, modern Iran in this country. And he writes a book that actually kind of opened up my eyes to Iran. If you need to understand Iran's current political construct, it all derives from the 1906 constitutional revolution, which I have to admit, before I read this, I had not known much about the 1906 constitutional revolution. But even up until the Islamic Revolution in 1979, it is the constitutional revolution they stick to, the principles of the constitutional revolution in 1906. But he takes you through the previous the Qajar regime, which is then superseded by the Pahlavi regime, and the Shah that we all know, who was deposed in 79, and his father. And he takes us through to the 53 coup, which is such controversy in the West, where America and Britain got involved, and takes you all the way up into 79, of course. And as I say, there's the Green Revolution, I think, in 2008, and then the revolution. Oh, it's not a revolution; it's demonstrations where they're killing thousands of people. The West doesn't really report it, and that's where we are. So I noticed Roger's left the room. Obviously, no interest in Iran.
It's very emotional right now.
I shall edit this bit out.
I think that sounds amazing. Ali Ansari, has he been on your...
He has.
Oh, sorry, I've missed it. I will look out for it. I have heard him on another excellent history podcast, and he was brilliant on that. I will listen to it. Because it's absolutely one of the most fascinating stories in the world, and also feeds into everything that's happening in Israel. I mean, you can't understand the world without understanding Iran, and I don't understand Iran, so obviously I don't understand the world, so maybe I need to read it.
Just as the basic, with Iran, I mean, it's a country that is, I think it was around 80 million people, and it's got huge natural resources. It's extraordinary that it has been held back. Well, it has been held back by failures in political leadership, clearly through much of the 20th century, when it was in hock to Western powers. And then the Shah, actually, it's interesting, if you read Simon Sebag Montefiori's The World, he's very impressed by the Shah and thinks he's sort of quite a key player during the sort of late 60s and early 70s internationally. If you read the Ali Ansari book, it's all about how the Shah domestically is just making mistakes left, right and centre, failing to capitalise on Iran's income from oil in the 70s, which ultimately leads to his overthrow. But it's the potential that Iran has not been realised, and it won't be under the current regime. That's not going to happen. So it looks like it will require...
Well, it feels like it's being realised for ill at the moment.
Yeah. It'll require a revolution.
I mean, you have the regime as well. I mean, often doesn't turn out particularly well.
And I think the women of Iran have been so unbelievably brave over the last, few years, and I think...
Well, they're at the forefront of these demonstrations.
Yeah,
I mean, you see videos on Instagram, it's fascinating. They're just throwing them off, walking down the streets in Tehran. My wife has been in Iran pre to this, in I think it was the early 2000s. And she was, I think, 18, 19, and was called a prostitute for walking down the street with her hijab not quite as they would like it. It's just bonkers. So, that kind of language shouted out in the street seems to be quite commonplace if you aren't, if you're a traditionalist or you're, from the morality police.
Well, unfortunately, that's the thin end of the wedge. Just being called a prostitute. I mean, we're looking at physical violence and oppression. Yeah.
Yeah, there have been countless women who've been beaten up and murdered, and it's awful. Yeah. So anyway, that is my pick.
But I think it's very timely. Given the nefarious role that Iran is currently playing, as we know, in terms of backing various sort of insurgent groups, Hezbollah and Hamas and the rest of it, and being the sort of the spider in the web in the Middle East of fomenting all sorts of unrest and trouble. It's very timely to understand where all that comes from and the wider history behind it.
Yeah, listening to Ali Ansari about on this, he's very, he's obviously tuned into people who are there in Iran. He's I think born in this country, certainly brought up in this country, and he's obviously no friend of the regime, but I think he there is, I get the sense from him that there is a growing realization amongst a larger amount of the population that this regime is nearing its end. It's just when, what sparks
how it happens and how bloody it will be.
Exactly, and how violent it will be. I mean, that's the frightening thing,
Yeah, agreed.
Anyway, Richard.
On a lighter note, listeners. Now, in terms of my last pick, let's have a fun one for women and men, and as of broadcast, the 149 other genders that are out there. So let's go for Spy Masters, which is a great summer read because you can dip in and out of it. It covers all sorts of period. It's written by some of the people around this table and others. And, I mean, obviously Aspects has a great contingent of people interested in espionage. And this book covers all sorts. We've got from the Romans to Cold War to now. And there's some wonderful interviews, short stories, articles. It's a veritable feast that won't make you sick, hopefully. And we have the wonderful author of the introduction here. So I shall give Antonia a platform to speak about it and recommend it also.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful anthology of spy writing. Which is available in all good. I don't know, available everywhere.
It's certainly in a very well-known bookshop, which all these books, by the way, dear listeners, will have links in the show notes for you to click on, and you can click away to your heart's content, and will take you to a very well-known online bookstore.
Yeah, on which you can find this brilliant Spy Masters anthology. So we've got some great stuff in there. So there's some stuff from General David Petraeus, who I interviewed for the podcast on the... on being both a user and a collector of intelligence, because of course he was former director of the CIA as well as being a general on the ground. We've got a brilliant interview by Roger Morehouse of this parish, interviewing Ben McIntyre about Agent Sonia, the fascinating spy who ran the atomic spy Klaus Fuchs. There's so much in there. Actually, it's extraordinary.
I actually thought short stories were good. I read, I think it was Alex Gurlis' short story in there, which is really, really, it makes you want to know what happens next. What's the next chapter? So
it's fun. It's fun. Yeah, basically, it's one of these books that you just keep in the loo, but don't associate it with the word toilet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's got some stuff by Lizzie Buchan in there as well. Who've also been. Honestly, there's some fantastic.
It's got the lot.
It's got the lot. So yeah, highly recommended. And we'll also give you a kind of, if you're looking for ideas of things to read. There's loads in
And gifts.
There
is a hardback version available.
Yeah, if there's someone in your life that you think like your dad. It's a dad book. I don't know why I'm looking at Roger. It's because people are always telling him that they remind him of that he reminds them of their dad. So
granddad.
Yeah. Slightly suspicious uncle.
Wow.
So yes. Anyway.
Yeah, that's my final pick. Yes, a nice fun read.
Well, Antonia, it would be, I think, probably unethical for you to also pick Spy Masters. So what's your final pick?
Yeah, so I have picked a book that I read in my capacity as the host of the Spy Masters podcast. So it's a book by Hugh Wilford, who is an academic of British origin, I believe, but who lives in and works in California at the university there. And it's called The CIA and Imperial History. And I think Roger said earlier in this podcast that some of the best books are the ones that give you a slightly sort of new window onto something and make you think differently about a subject that you already know. And this is an absolutely brilliant example of that. So Hugh Wilford looks at the origins of the CIA, and he basically explores this paradox that the CIA was founded within an atmosphere of strong American anti-imperialist rhetoric, and yet it was staffed by people who were both immersed in a kind of imperial culture and acted with a kind of imperial swagger. And it's a completely fascinating way of looking at it. So these young CIA agents were immersed in the literature of kind of Rudyard Kipling and, you know, the sort of swaggering spy stories of the first half of the 20th century. And then they kind of created the CIA in that image, and then they were sent off to postings across the world, and they were literally in some cases moving in to the kind of, you know, colonial houses that the British were moving out of, and re-employing the same servants and using the same cutlery, and then were surprised that people sort of saw them as kind of indistinguishable from the ones who just left. So it's absolutely fascinating and brilliant book, and it also talks quite a lot about a subject that I'm quite interested in, which is the way that and I write about this in the introduction to the Spy Masters anthology, which is the way that in espionage history is one of the very few fields of historical inquiry where fact and fiction sort of bleed into each other in both directions. I find it so interesting. So a load of the spies who become interested in spying do so because they've read the literature, they've read the stories, they're drawn by the romance. And then obviously an awful lot of them then go on to write novels, right? So a lot of the great spy novelists were themselves at some point spies. So it creates this kind of odd and bizarre feedback loop where, you know, the facts and the fiction become part of each other in a way that I think isn't necessarily replicated in other areas. I mean, Roger, obviously, you know, you write about World War II and stuff, and you're doing a book on U-boats, but you've never actually driven a U-boat or bombed a merchant vessel.
No, to my shame.
I know, right?
Do you drive a U-boat?
I don't know. Pilot it, captain it.
Sail it? Submerge?
Well, any of those things. But
But you haven't done any of them.
I have been in a couple of static U-boats, but that's as far as it goes.
Okay, while they're sitting on the shore, not
exactly.
moving.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things that I find most fascinating about the whole area. So yeah, great book. Do read it. Hugh Wilford. He's coming on the Spy Masters podcast very soon. I'm interviewing him tomorrow night. I was going to interview him tonight, but I knew that you guys would be plying me with booze, so it was really bad idea.
I'd be interested to, in terms of that fact and fiction, what does he think about Graham Greene, who was kind of very critical of, obviously, the American project of all of this, and, you know, knew a lot of these people firsthand, and probably witnessed the kind of replication of a kind of an imperial kind of swagger.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, I would argue that as much as they may have tried to not replicate certain things, there was a slight inevitability.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, if you're the states becoming the sort of hegemonic power of the world in the 60s, it's all very well being anti-imperialist in your rhetoric, but actually in the practice of that, what does it look like? I mean, if it walks like an imperialist and quacks like an imperialist, it's looks pretty imperial.
And also they were worried about the communist duck.
Right,
how do you stop that?
Yeah, and the communist duck was equally imperialist. I mean, this is the
Yeah,
irony,
I
right?
agree, yeah.
So, you know, the communists, again, drew ideologues in the 1930s specifically through the anti-imperialist ideology and through into the 40s and 50s, the end of empire. You know, the communist ideology was gaining ground across the ex-colonies precisely because it presented itself as an alternative to imperialist ideology. And yet it was fundamentally imperialist.
It was just another empire.
Yeah.
Right, it's just another empire. It's just another empire, but maybe one that's even worse.
Yeah. Maybe.
Definitely. Sorry, Richard. I don't know what...
Worse than what?
Well, oh gosh, if I say now, then I look like an apologist for the British Empire. People, I'm not. But I'm just saying, you know, if you're, you know, the idea that an expansive ideology that owes allegiance to Moscow or Beijing is a better bet than an expansionist ideology that owes allegiance to Washington, I think I know which I would prefer.
Yeah. And it's always interesting that you mentioned the language earlier. Like I don't know what was Le Carré or spy novel language and what is actual, proper tradecraft language.
Well, ironically, I think Le Carré created the term tradecraft, or certainly put it into popular parlance. Yeah.
And he invented the term mole. And I mean, really interesting talking to people. So I've obviously talked now to a number of spy writers, and a lot of them say, they obviously make stuff up, but then sometimes they then are told with a nudge and a wink that you've managed to get it. It's just not so distinct, and then you read the actual, obviously, because in the course of my book writing, if you read the sort of the NKVD manuals for foreign agents and how they're supposed to behave and what you're supposed to do. I mean, they read like a novel. Dead drops and all of this stuff. I mean, they're not made up. This shit is true. You're going to somebody in a park and saying, the ducks are flying to Moscow. Oh, are they? Isn't it a beautiful morning in Berlin? And that's when you this stuff.
The hyacinths are lovely in Budapest.
You're either selling secrets or about to have sex in the toilet.
Exactly.
But on my way here, funny enough, as a terribly dull random aside, I walked past a block. You may have seen this, Ollie, called the River House. You seen that?
Yeah, that's the MI6 building.
Yeah, but there's a block around the corner from your house called the River House.
Maybe that's where they put the old spies out to pasture. Maybe that's the real
pensions
Slough
are better
House.
than that. This was not the greatest block.
Yeah, we're close to Lewisham, listeners. Right. So, thank you, Antonia. Now we move on to Roger.
Yes, in a rare departure from the Second World War, I'm going to the First World War. Can you believe it? It is, and
Like when Luis Figo went to Real Madrid.
still 20th century, listeners. So thank God for that. It's the Nick Lloyd's Eastern Front. Nick Lloyd, he's a professor at King's in London. Brilliant military historian. He teaches our officer corps their military history and military strategy and all of that at Shrivenham as well. He's an all-round good guy. Yeah, the Royal Defence College, I think it's called at Shrivenham. Yeah, and he wrote a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago. He wrote a book on the Western Front, which went down very well. He's now reprised that approach with the Eastern Front, which is the sort of the poor relation, the ginger stepchild of the Western Front. Does
this involve the Austro-Hungarians?
Yes, of course. Yes, and it's much less well known, particularly in our Western historiography. We tend to focus on the the mud and blood and poppycock and all of that of the Western Front to excess, I would argue.
Poetry.
The Eastern Front is much more mobile. The front moves quite a lot. You've got your three main protagonists, of course, being the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians and the Russians. All three, of course, will collapse at the end of the war. So it's a hugely influential area, and it ranges widely right across Ukraine, Poland, and into the Balkans as well. And he covers all of that. And this is the world of rather preposterous sort of Austro-Hungarian generals with ridiculous names and sort of plumed hats, who almost all of whom are more or less incompetent. And are ruling over or commanding a group of soldiers, which is this is the world of Schweik. If you know your Jaroslav Hasek novel, The Good Soldier Schweik, which is I would urge you all to read.
Oh, I don't know that.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, he served in that campaign, and he was a Czech and served in that campaign, and he wrote his big novel was The Good Soldier Schweik, which is a sort of typical Central European Czech participant of that period, who is can't really be bothered, isn't moved by any sort of there's no ideology that moves him. He's just kind of goes with the flow. It is vaguely subversive, but usually by omission rather than commission. And it really sums up in a way to some extent I suppose, kind of almost check character in a way. It's kind of, yeah, whatever. It's a little bit laid back and can't really be bothered. And he sums that up, and it's that world that actually the book sort of brings to life very, very well. The sort of dysfunction at the heart of the Austro-Hungarian military machine and the others. I mean, you've got, the Russians are the same in the sense that they're sort of throwing men very often without shoes and without arms into this maelstrom, which of course eventually provokes the revolution. So it's a really fascinating tableau. It is dense, I would say. It's a good 600 pages plus. It's a proper treatment. So be prepared for that. But
there's a third volume due. Would that be on the sort of African front or the other fronts almost?
Perhaps Middle East, perhaps. I'm not
maybe
sure.
it just
The African front and World War
There's
One.
a Middle Eastern front, isn't there?
Yes, there was.
I know there was fighting in Africa. I wasn't aware there was a front worthy of its name.
You're going to find out in this third volume.
Maybe it won't be 600 pages.
But it's a really good treatment of a subject that I think traditionally gets neglected, and is historically significant. Of course, it was treated by Norman Stone a long time ago, but this is a sort of worthy revisiting of an important subject, and he really does it justice.
Good stuff. I was listening to The Rest Is History, and we can mention other podcasts if I like them on this podcast. And I was listening. The Rest Is History's been doing the build up to the First World War.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, it is brilliant. And Austro-Hungary is just like, they seem like a bunch of clowns, really.
Yeah, but actually, to be fair, I mean, that is the conventional view. But then, I listen to the same thing, and you actually come out of that. The first. I think it was 4 parts on Sarajevo at the beginning, and you come out of that with a tremendous amount of sympathy for Franz Ferdinand, don't you?
Oh, yeah. He's such a lovely guy in it.
I know.
But
Unless you're a bird.
Unless you're a bird.
But you mean an actual feathered bird.
Flying bird.
But they use Christopher Clark's Sleepwalkers a lot in that, and I have to say it's one of my all-time favourite books ever. I love that book. I think
He's a friend that should be on the podcast as well, Christopher Clark.
Yeah, he taught me at university. Oh. I know. Wasn't I lucky?
Yes.
Pearls before swine. I was just trying to get to the pub all the time.
Wonderful. Well, we should move on. Where are we now? I'm the last one. Yes. Well done. Thank you. Right. So, my last one is a novel. It is written by Lucy Ash, who's written 2 novels now. This is her second, The Sleeping Beauties. And her first one was Clara Olivia. And it's both her books are written around dancing and more specifically ballet. And the second one's really interesting because I don't know about you, but if I were running a ballet company at Sadler's Wells during the Second World War, I think I wouldn't go to the Netherlands in May 1940.
Not the best move.
No, and her novel is not based around this. It is a key part in the novel. It starts off on a train, and there is a mother and daughter in a carriage, and then in steps this sort of whirlwind who takes a liking to them. It seems very mysterious and strange, and Lucy's very good at bringing that to life. But it is based then, so you get flashbacks to this ballet tour. The Sadler's Wells Ballet Theatre thought it would be a great idea to go.
The Low Countries in the spring of 1940.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
And next thing they know, they're standing in the way of a full-scale blitzkrieg advance. And
in only their tutus.
Yes, and there's always stuff coming out, I think, in the second that we're learning about the Second World War. But this is genuinely original. I had no idea about this. But the idea around the novel is fantastic. I mean, it's just like...
So the premise is genuine, is it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Wow,
that
that's
happened.
amazing.
Sounds like a nutcracker of a story.
Lucy Ash would appreciate that. Any ballet fan would appreciate that. That's a decent pun for you for once.
For once.
And her first one, I think you've read the first one.
Yeah, I read her debut, which was Clara and Olivia, and I reviewed it for the paper, and I thought it was wonderful. I think she's a great writer, and obviously excellent at ballet.
Well, it's suspense.
Unlike me.
Yeah, well, yes. Lucy Ash was a ballet dancer.
I was told when I did ballet that I looked like a young elephant.
Wow.
I know.
That is particularly harsh. But that's...
By my mother.
Indian on African. How big were your ears?
I was saying that sounds like a hate crime these days.
I know. But obviously Lucy Ash did not look like an elephant, more like a swan, and wrote a wonderful book. I really love Clara and Olivia. So I will read The Sleeping Beauty. So I have to admit I haven't read it, but if it's anywhere near as good as her first book, then it's very well worth reading.
I like novels, particularly this one, which has got a bit of... it's not... Creepy's not the right word. It's more... you don't know what people's motives are.
Intrigue.
Spot the writer.
Yeah, she's good at that. Her first novel was full of that. Yeah, lots of kind of darkness and sinisterness.
Exactly.
Which is always good. We like that in a novel.
I like that as a premise though. That the jeopardy in being in the Low Countries in the spring of 1940 is a tremendous sort of starting point. You know, you think of from my last book, you think of Anne Frank's family, for example, who had escaped Nazi Germany into Holland, as did tens of thousands of German Jews went to Holland in the previous sort of 6 years to escape Nazi Germany and thought they'd be safe, and then of course 1940 all of that comes crashing to a halt. So it's a tremendous premise to sort of put people there who thought they'd be safe, and lo and behold, what happens. So I mean, I like that as a starting
it's a lovely
point.
thing to play with as a writer as well. Is your audience's foreknowledge that your characters don't have. That's always a great thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she does it beautifully because, she would. Good novelist.
Great stuff, great insight. Well, I think we are now done. So that's been fantastic. 3 books for everyone. Links are in the show notes. This just leaves me to thank everyone. Thank Richard, Roger and Antonia and the listeners for listening.
I think they need most thanks, I'll be honest.
That's true. And particularly over Richard's appalling puns. Thank you for enduring those. And we wish you a great summer holiday from Aspects of History. Thanks very much for listening. Links are in the show notes, as I mentioned, and please do share with the like-minded. Coming up, I've got plenty more history, including espionage, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the liberation of Paris, Hitler's people, and much, much more. But until then, thank you and good night.